You are standing in what appears to be a perfectly renovated home. The kitchen is stunning. The bathrooms are magazine-worthy, the paint is fresh, the fixtures are modern, and the listing agent is telling you that everything has been completely updated: new roof, new HVAC, new electrical, new plumbing, turnkey, move-in ready, zero deferred maintenance. But I have inspected over 10,000 homes in my career as a forensic structural engineer, and I have developed what I call forensic vision, the ability to look at a freshly renovated flip and see exactly what is underneath the new paint, behind the new drywall, and beneath the new flooring. And what I see in flipped properties with alarming consistency is one of the most dangerous patterns in American residential real estate. The cosmetic renovation is not an upgrade. It is a concealment strategy. New paint covers water stains that indicate active roof leaks. New flooring covers subfloor rot that indicates long-term moisture intrusion. New drywall covers framing modifications that were never permitted, never engineered, and never inspected. And the buyers who purchase these properties, trusting that completely renovated means completely sound, are walking into a financial disaster that reveals itself one expensive problem at a time over the first 3 years of ownership. I am Engineer Vance, licensed forensic structural engineer. Today I'm going to share the dirty secrets that house flippers hide from buyers, the specific concealment strategies I have documented across thousands of inspections, and I'm going to give you the forensic toolkit to see through every one of them before you sign a purchase agreement. To understand why flippers hide structural problems, you have to understand the economics of the flip. A house flipper's profit is the difference between what they buy a property for, plus all renovation and holding costs, and what they sell it for. In a competitive real estate market, purchase prices are relatively fixed by market forces. Holding costs accumulate every single day the property sits unsold. That means the primary lever a flipper controls is renovation cost, and the primary pressure on every flip project is to spend as little as possible on renovation, while creating the maximum possible visual impact at sale. New kitchen cabinets cost $4,000 and generate enormous visual impact. Replacing rotted rim joists costs $8,000 and generates zero visual impact, because the buyer never sees the rim joists, and if the flipper covers them with new flooring before the sale, neither does the home inspector. Quartz countertops cost $3,000 and produce the kind of photographs that generate multiple offers. Properly engineering and permitting a load-bearing wall removal costs $6,000 in engineering fees, permit fees, and inspection compliance, and produces no photographs, no buyer excitement, and no competitive advantage at sale. The result of this economic logic, applied systematically across thousands of flip projects every year, is a residential housing market populated with properties that are visually transformed, but structurally unchanged, or worse, structurally compromised by renovation shortcuts that were concealed behind the cosmetic transformation. Let me walk you through the 5 concealment strategies I document most consistently in flipped properties, with the specific engineering failures behind each one. The first and most common concealment strategy is cosmetic coverage of water damage. Water damage is the most prevalent undisclosed defect in flipped properties because it is the easiest to hide and the most expensive to remediate properly. Active or historical water intrusion, from roof leaks, plumbing failures, foundation moisture, or inadequate exterior waterproofing, leaves evidence in the form of staining, microbial growth, structural deterioration, and elevated moisture content in framing members. A flipper who discovers water damage has 2 choices: remediate it properly, which involves identifying and eliminating the moisture source, removing damaged materials, treating for microbial contamination per IICR CS 520, and replacing structural members that have lost capacity, a process that can cost $15,000 to $40,000. Or paint over the stains, install new flooring over the damaged subfloor, and cover the affected framing with new drywall. The second option costs $2,000 and is completely invisible to a buyer who does not bring a moisture meter and a thermal imaging camera to the showing. The engineering consequence of concealed water damage is structural capacity loss in the floor and wall framing system. The IRC structural design provisions in Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 assume that lumber framing members maintain their published allowable design values that are based on sound, dry lumber with moisture content below 19%. When framing lumber is subjected to chronic elevated moisture, 2 failure processes occur simultaneously. The first is decay. fungal decomposition of the wood fiber that progressively reduces the member's cross-sectional area and structural capacity. A 2x10 floor joist that has experienced decay over 30% of its cross-section has lost more than 30% of its bending capacity. It is now structurally deficient under the loads it was designed to carry, regardless of how solid it looks from above through new flooring. The second process is fastener corrosion. The metal hangers, joist connectors, and structural screws that transfer loads between framing members corroding in chronically wet environments and losing their rated capacity. A corroded joist hanger that has lost 30% of its cross-sectional area at the bearing point is no longer adequate for the code-required loads it was installed to carry, and nobody can see it through the beautiful new flooring installed on top of it. The second concealment strategy is unpermitted structural modifications. Wall removals are among the most visually impactful renovations a flipper can perform. Opening up a floor plan dramatically increases the appeal and perceived value of a property and costs relatively little in labor and materials. But a load-bearing wall removal is a structural engineering intervention. It requires identification of the load path above the removed wall, design of an adequately sized header or beam to carry the tributary load previously carried by the wall, design of adequate posts or columns to carry the concentrated beam reactions to the foundation, and verification that the foundation below the new load path has adequate capacity for the concentrated load. All of this work requires engineering design, a building permit, and a framing inspection before the work is concealed. When a flipper removes a load-bearing wall without permits, the beam is typically sized by guess rather than by calculation. I have documented beam installations in unpermitted wall removals that were carrying loads 2 to 3 times their allowable capacity, beams that were deflecting visibly under dead load alone, transferring excessive stress to the trimmer studs and bearing points below, and creating progressive settlement conditions that manifest as sloping floors and sticking doors within 2 to 5 years of the renovation. Under IRC Section R602.7, header sizing is explicitly governed by span, load, and lumber species. That is a specific engineering determination, not a contractor judgment call. When that determination is made incorrectly and concealed behind drywall, the buyer inherits a structural deficiency that is invisible until it fails. The third concealment strategy is electrical system cosmetic upgrade without substantive correction. Flippers routinely replace visible electrical components, light fixtures, outlets, switches, and panel cover plates, while leaving the underlying wiring system completely unchanged. A panel that has been redecorated with a new cover plate and new breaker labels may contain aluminum branch circuit wiring, double-tapped breakers, undersized service entrance conductors, or Federal Pacific or Zinsco panel equipment with documented failure rates, all conditions that create fire risk and that are invisible behind the cosmetic update. Under NEC Article 210.12, AFCI protection is required on circuits serving living areas in residential construction. In a flip that involves opening walls, the exposed circuits must be brought into compliance. A flipper who patches the walls without pulling permits avoids that compliance requirement entirely, and the buyer inherits circuits that are both code deficient and fire risk elevated behind brand new outlet covers and a smart thermostat. The fourth concealment strategy is foundation issue cosmetic coverage. Foundation movement manifests as diagonal cracks at window and door corners, floor slopes, gaps between walls and ceilings, and sticking doors and windows, all of which are cosmetically correctable without addressing the underlying foundation condition. A flipper who fills cracks with joint compound, rehangs doors that stick, installs new flooring that obscures floor slopes, and repaints eliminates every visible symptom of foundation distress without correcting a single square inch of the underlying structural condition. I have walked flipped properties where every visible crack had been filled and painted, every door had been planed and rehung, and every floor slope had been obscured by carefully installed flooring, and where my slope measurements and crack pattern analysis still documented active differential settlement that had not been disclosed to any buyer. The fifth concealment strategy is deferred mechanical system replacement with cosmetic distraction. HVAC systems, water heaters, and electrical panels have finite service lives. A flipper who is selling a home with a 20-year-old HVAC system faces a choice between replacing it at a cost of $8,000 to $15,000 or installing a new programmable thermostat and cleaning the vents, creating the visual impression of a maintained system while leaving the aging equipment in place. I have inspected flipped homes where the HVAC equipment data plates showed installation dates from the mid-2000s, while the listing advertised a completely updated home, because the thermostat was new and the vents had been freshly painted. Let me walk you through a forensic investigation I conducted in the East Atlanta Village neighborhood in 2023, a case that encapsulates the complete failure pattern of a cosmetically excellent but structurally compromised flip. The buyers were a couple in their early 40s purchasing what the listing described as a fully renovated 1928 Craftsman bungalow, new everything, tastefully updated, turnkey condition. The purchase price was $485,000. The home inspection noted the property was in excellent condition, with no major concerns. The buyers waived their inspection contingency in a competitive offer situation. Escrow closed in September 2023. By January 2024, 4 months after closing, the buyers had documented a floor slope developing in the rear addition that had not been present at closing, a new diagonal crack at the corner of the rear addition's window opening that appeared within 60 days of occupancy, a persistent musty odor in the master bedroom closet that intensified during rain events, and an HVAC system that was failing to maintain set temperature during cold snaps, despite the listing having advertised it as new. They retained me for a forensic investigation in February 2024. My investigation documented 5 separate areas of concealed deficiency, each one corresponding to a specific flip concealment strategy. The rear addition had been constructed on a perimeter stem wall foundation that had experienced differential settlement of approximately 1 inch at the southeast corner, a condition that had been actively developing for years based on historical crack patterns visible in the original mortar joints beneath the new drywall when I performed selective demolition. The flipper had filled and painted all visible cracks, re-leveled the flooring at sale, and installed new baseboard that concealed the wall-to-floor gap. The settlement was ongoing, driven by root encroachment from a large oak tree within 6 feet of the foundation, and required root barrier installation, void filling, and underpinning at a remediation cost of $22,000. The master bedroom closet moisture condition was sourced to a failed roof-to-wall flashing assembly at the rear addition roofline, a condition that had produced active water intrusion during every significant rain event for an estimated 2 to 3 years, based on the extent of staining and microbial growth on the wall sheathing. The flipper had painted the closet interior, including over active mold staining on the drywall surface, and had installed new closet organizer systems that covered the lower wall where the moisture damage was most severe. Remediation cost, $14,000. The kitchen wall removal had been performed on a load-bearing wall carrying second-floor framing above. The installed beam was a doubled 2x10 dimensional lumber assembly spanning 9 feet, a span requiring a minimum 3-ply 2x12 or equivalent LVL section under the tributary load from the second-floor framing above, per IRC Table R602.7. The beam was deflecting approximately 3/8 of an inch at mid-span under dead load alone. No permit had been pulled for the wall removal. Remediation required installation of an engineered LVL replacement beam with temporary shoring at $11,500. The electrical panel was a Federal Pacific Stablock panel, with a new cover plate and new breaker labels, a brand with a thoroughly documented history of breaker failure to trip under overload conditions and an elevated fire risk profile that has been the subject of consumer safety warnings for decades. Panel replacement cost $6,800, and the HVAC data plate showed an installation date of 2007. The unit was 16 years old at the time of sale, well beyond the typical 15-year service life for residential split systems in the Atlanta climate. The thermostat was a current model smart thermostat, the only component of the HVAC system that was actually new. Full system replacement cost $11,000. Total forensic remediation cost across all 5 findings $69,300 on a $485,000 property that the listing described as new everything and turnkey condition. So here is the forensic buyer's protection protocol that engineer Vance recommends for every flipped property evaluation. Rent a thermal imaging camera for between $75 and $150 per day, and run it across every wall and ceiling surface in the property, paying particular attention to exterior walls, areas adjacent to bathrooms and kitchens, and ceiling areas below rooflines and valleys. Bring a calibrated moisture meter and probe the subfloor at every bathroom and kitchen perimeter, at the base of every exterior wall, and at any location where the thermal camera indicated a moisture anomaly. Readings above 19% in wood framing members represent a structural concern requiring forensic engineering evaluation. Measure floor slope in every room using a digital level, and measure door frame squareness by checking the diagonal dimensions of each door opening. A difference in diagonal measurements exceeding 1/4 inch indicates racking distortion consistent with foundation movement or framing settlement. Pull the permit record from your local building department before releasing your inspection contingency. Any visible renovation without a corresponding permit and final inspection sign-off must be treated as potentially non-compliant until proven otherwise. Hire a structural engineer for any flipped property above $300,000. Commission a sewer scope inspection at $200 to $400, and commission an electrical inspection by a licensed electrician specifically tasked with identifying panel type, wiring material, and AFCI compliant status. These 3 professional inspections combined cost less than $2,500. They are the difference between closing with confidence and inheriting $69,000 of concealed structural liability. After 10,000 home inspections, the pattern is clear, and it is consistent. The flip renovation model, as it is practiced by the majority of investors in the American residential market, is optimized for visual impact at sale, not for structural integrity, not for code compliance, and not for the long-term financial well-being of the buyer who inherits the property. The quartz countertops are real. The luxury vinyl plank flooring is real. The smart thermostat is real. And the rotted rim joists, the unpermitted beam, the concealed moisture damage, and the 16-year-old HVAC system hiding behind the new thermostat are equally real. Bring a thermal camera, bring a moisture meter, pull the permit record, hire a structural engineer, and understand that in a flipped property, the renovation you can see is marketing. The renovation you cannot see is what you are actually buying. I am Engineer Vance. Protect your structure, protect your investment,